The girl who stopped hopping continued. The morning came the way mornings always did on Waypoint Station, not with sunlight, but with the slow brightening of the artificial panels overhead, cycling from deep amber to pale gold, mimicking a dawn that none of the shelter's children had ever seen from a real planet's surface. Zara was already awake when the light shifted. She had been awake for most of the night. She lay very still beneath her thermal blanket, watching the ceiling brighten, and she did what she always did in the quiet before breakfast. She tried to remember her mother's voice. It was getting harder. The voice had once been something she could summon clearly warm and low, with the particular harmonic doubling that Calorian mothers used when singing to their young, a sound like two notes braided together into one. Now when Zara reached for it, she found only the shape of it, the echo of an echo. She pressed her antenna flat against her skull and closed her eyes and tried harder. Nothing. She got up. Breakfast in the children's wing was organized chaos. Small bodies colliding around the dispensing station, arguing over the last of the sweetened protein cubes, a toddler named Bricks wailing because someone had taken his spoon. Zara moved through it all like a stone in a current, present, unhurried, unreached. She took her tray to the end of the long table, the seat nobody else wanted because it was nearest the recycling unit, which hummed and occasionally shuddered. Zara found the humming comforting. It filled the silence so she didn't have to. She ate methodically. Around her, the other children were loud and alive in the way children are when they haven't yet learned to economize their hope. Even the sad ones had a quality of readiness about them, a leaning forward. Any day, a door might open. Any day, someone might come. Zara had stopped leaning forward 14 months ago. She remembered the exact moment. It had been a family from the outer rim, a man with a broad, sunburned face and a woman who smelled of engine oil and something sweet. They had two biological children of their own, noisy boys who had chased each other through the visiting room. The couple had been warm. They had sat on the floor with her, which almost nobody did. They had asked her about Caloria, what she remembered, what she missed. The woman had touched one of Zara's antennae very gently, with a curiosity that held no revulsion, only wonder. What does it feel like? The woman had asked. Like hearing Zara had said, which was the closest she could get in standard, but with my whole head. The woman had smiled. The man had smiled. They had stayed for 2 hours, which was longer than anyone else ever had. When they left, Coordinator Pell had squeezed Zara's shoulder and her antenna had been straight up for the first time in months. 3 days later, Pell had come to her corner with a careful face. They chose another child, she had said, a boy from Sector 9. They felt it was a better fit. Zara had nodded. She was very good at nodding. That night she had pressed her forehead against the cold wall for a long time. When she finally pulled away, something had settled inside her, heavy and permanent, like sediment finding the floor of a river. She had made herself a quiet promise, no more leaning forward, no more listening for footsteps that were coming for someone else. Disappointment was a wound that reopened every time, and she had decided, with the pragmatic brutality that grief sometimes produces in children, that she would simply stop allowing the wound to form. She had kept her promise for 14 months. The veteran arrived at 10 o'clock. Zara knew because she heard the doors open, she always heard the doors, and because the quality of the air in the visiting corridor changed in some way she couldn't have explained to someone without antenna. A new presence. Large, probably. Unhurried, definitely. She did not look up from her drawing. She was working on the moons again. She had drawn them so many times that they had become less memory and more invention. She could no longer be certain whether the larger moon truly had that dark smear across its southern face, or whether she had added it herself over months of repetition. The drawing was becoming less a portrait and more a monument, a thing she built to fill the space where the real memory should have been. Pell's voice drifted from the corridor, professional and warm, doing the orientation speech Zara had memorized from hearing it so many times. 32 children currently in residence, wide range of ages and backgrounds. We encourage you to take your time, there's no pressure. Footsteps, more than one pair, Pell's quick, light ones, and another set slower, deliberate with a slight unevenness to them. An old injury, maybe. Something in the gait that said the body had been through something and was still unhurriedly working it out. The footsteps stopped at the entrance to the children's wing. Zara shaded the dark smear on the moon and did not look up. She heard the soft sounds of greeting, Pell introducing the veteran to the children who ran forward, as children always did, bright-faced and eager. She heard the veteran's voice for the first time, lower than she'd expected, a little rough, with a slowness to it that wasn't hesitation but deliberateness. Someone who chose their words the way some people chose their steps, carefully on uncertain ground. Hello, what's your names? I'm Docs, I'm 7, do you have a ship? A pause, then with what sounded like genuine amusement, I used to. Did it have guns? It had a few. Wicked. More voices layered in. Zara drew. The minutes passed. The footsteps moved around the room. She tracked them without meaning to, the way she tracked everything. The veteran spent time with each cluster of children. She heard the low voice asking questions, heard laughter, heard one of the younger ones begin to cry and be gently soothed. The voice was patient. It had the patience of someone who had waited for things in conditions far less comfortable than this. The footsteps moved closer. Zara pressed her stylus down harder than she meant to and made a dark, wrong line across the moon's face. She did not look up. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Not the silence of someone who hadn't noticed her. The other kind, the silence of someone who had noticed her and was choosing deliberately not to announce themselves, giving her the choice. Zara kept her eyes on her drawing for another 10 seconds. Then, because something in the quality of that silence was different from every other silence that had ever settled near her corner, she looked up. The veteran was not what she had expected, though she hadn't let herself expect anything. He was old in the way that the Frontier Corps made people old, which was different from ordinary aging. The Corps aged people in their eyes first and their bodies second. He had a broad, weathered face, dark skin marked with the faint grid lines of old pressure suit wear, and gray at his temples. He was tall but carried himself low, the way people did when they'd spent decades in ship corridors with inadequate headroom. One hand rested on a battered walking cane, though he didn't seem to lean on it much, more like he carried it out of habit or loyalty. He wasn't looking at her antenna, he wasn't looking at her skin. He was looking at her drawing. "Are those moons?" he said. Zara looked down at her drawing, then back up at him. "Yes." "From where?" A pause. She didn't usually answer that question. "The Calorian system." He made a low sound, not quite a word. "I did a transit past the outer belt of Caloria once, 17 years ago, maybe 18. He tilted his head slightly, studying the drawing. The moons were visible from the observation deck. I remember thinking they looked like they were watching something. Zara stared at him. Her antenna, without her permission, moved, just slightly, just enough. "They do," she said quietly. My people believed that the moons were the ancestors, not literally, but..." She stopped. "But it felt true anyway," he said. She looked at him carefully. "Yes." He didn't smile exactly. Something in his face shifted, a softening around the eyes, unhurried. He glanced toward the bench on the other side of her small table. "May I sit down?" Nobody had ever asked. The other adults had crouched or stood or occasionally and with great deliberate warmth lowered themselves to the floor. Nobody had asked. "Yes," Zara said. He sat down across from her with the slight care of someone whose knees had opinions and set his cane against the table's edge. Up close she could see a small tattoo on the inside of his right wrist, the Frontier Corps insignia, the kind that was applied at enlistment and never came off. He looked at her drawing again. "Would it bother you if I asked about them?" he said. "The moons." Something in Zara's chest moved in a way she didn't immediately have a name for. "Careful," said the settled sediment inside her. "Careful." "I don't remember very much," she said. It was her standard warning, a way of managing expectations downward before they could rise too high and come back down on her. "That's all right," he said. "I don't need you to remember. I'm curious about what you've made of them." He nodded toward the drawing. "The ones you've made up." She looked at him sharply. "Not criticizing," he said. "I do the same thing. I've been reconstructing a place I lived for 3 years in my head for 20 years. By now I'm probably mostly inventing it, but it's mine. It means something." A pause. "What does that one mean?" He pointed to the smaller moon, the one she always drew farthest away. Zara looked at it. She was the quieter one in the stories my mother told. She stopped. Her voice had done something unexpected on the word mother, not breaking but thickening very slightly, like light through water. The veteran didn't rush in to fill the space. He waited. "She watched over people who were lost," Zara said. "My mother said that when you couldn't find your way, you looked for the small moon because she was the one paying attention to you specifically." The veteran was quiet for a moment. "That's a good thing to believe in," he said finally. "I don't believe in it anymore," Zara said. It came out matter of fact. He looked at her. "No." "No," she picked up her stylus, looked at the wrong dark line she'd made across the large moon's face. "I used to." I stopped. He absorbed this without flinching, the way she'd noticed some adults could and many couldn't. "What made you stop?" he asked, not challengingly, not the way adults asked when they wanted to fix something, more like someone taking a careful measurement. Zara considered him for a long moment. "Things kept not happening," she said. "Things I hoped for, so I stopped hopping for them." "Efficient," he said. She blinked, not the word she'd expected. I mean that genuinely, he said, not cruelly. When I lost my unit 15 years ago, bad engagement near the terminus corridor, I did something similar. Stopped expecting to sleep well, stopped expecting the food to taste right, stopped expecting to feel like myself in a room full of people. He turned his walking cane slightly in his hand, a small habitual movement. It was efficient, it kept me functional for a while. And then, Zara asked before she could stop herself. And then I got tired of being only functional. He looked at her steadily. It's a decent place to survive, not a good place to live. Zara's antenna rose another fraction. She felt it happening and could not entirely stop it and was not entirely sure she wanted to. I don't live, she said, I stay here, that's different. For now, he said. She looked at him hard. You came here to adopt a child. Oh yes. You should adopt one of the others, the ones by the window, Docs. He's funny and he'll love you immediately. Or the twins in room 7, I know they look like a lot but they're very good at being quiet when they need to be. She heard herself speaking and felt a strange, distant quality to it, as if she were advising him from behind glass, protecting him, protecting herself, the old sediment speaking. I'm not easy. I'm not looking for easy, he said. My skin glows in the dark, it bothers some people. When I'm frightened, I make a sound that gives humans headaches. I don't speak much, I draw the same pictures over and over. She stopped. He waited. I stopped hopping, she said. I don't know how to start again, I think maybe I don't want to, because the starting again is the worst part, that's when it hurts. The veteran was quiet for a long moment. The recycling unit behind her shuddered and hummed. I know, he said. 2 words, not it will be okay or you'll learn or any of the other careful encouraging things the adults said that landed in the air between them and dissolved without touching her. Just, I know, with the weight of someone who had actually counted the cost and wasn't pretending otherwise. Zara's antennae were nearly vertical now, she couldn't help it. She hated that she couldn't help it. You'll leave, she said, her voice was very steady, she had practice at very steady. You'll talk to Pell and she'll have a careful face and she'll come to my corner and tell me you chose someone else and, she stopped, swallowed. I'm telling you it's all right, I have already decided it's all right, I just don't want to do the in-between part. The veteran looked at her for a long moment. She watched his face for the small kindnesses that preceded departure, the soft smile, the gentle shift in posture, the eyes moving fractionally toward the door. She was expert at reading those signs. His eyes didn't move toward the door. What if I told you I already talked to Pell, he said. 2 weeks ago she sent me your file. Zara went very still. I read it 4 times, he said. I read about the colony, about the transport, about the couple from New Brisbane. His voice was careful and even carrying the information like something that needed to be carried carefully. I came today because of you specifically, not to browse. A pause. I know that might make it worse if it doesn't work, I know it's a risk. But I thought you deserved to know that you were already the reason I was here before I walked through that door. The hum of the recycling unit filled the silence. Zara's hands, flat on the table on either side of her drawing, were very still. Her antennae were all the way up. She couldn't manage them at all. Why? She whispered, and he was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much truth to give and whether it was the right kind. Because the file said you'd stopped hopping, he said, and I know what that costs, and I thought, he paused. I thought that somebody who'd spent that much energy protecting herself deserved someone willing to be patient about it. Zara looked at her drawing, the small moon, the one who watched over people who were lost. The dark wrong line she'd drawn across the larger moon's face looked, she noticed for the first time, a little like a river. She didn't say anything for a long time. He didn't fill the silence, and she was grateful for that, for his particular gift of silence, the kind that didn't push. I can't promise, she said finally, that I'll be able to stop being like this quickly, the way I am. I'm not asking you to. I might, she stopped. It might take a very long time before I believe it. I've got time, he said, I'm retired. Something happened in Zara's chest. It was small. It was almost nothing. It was the very first, most fragile reopening of something she had sealed shut 14 months ago. Not hope, not yet, she would not call it that yet, but the faint structural memory of hope. The shape of the door, not the door itself. She looked up at him. My name is Zara, she said. I know, he said, I'm Merk. She looked down at her drawing again. Her stylus moved, almost of its own accord, to the small moon. She added something she hadn't drawn before, a faint second light source, the tiniest suggestion of illumination on the moon's dark side. The side that faced away. Still there, still lit just barely, if you knew to look. Merk watched her draw and didn't say anything, and the silence between them was, for the first time in a very long time, not empty. Pell watched from the doorway of the children's wing for a moment, then moved quietly away. She had learned, after many years, to recognize the difference between the silences that preceded endings and the silences that preceded something else. She went to her desk and opened the registry software and began, with the careful efficiency of someone who had been waiting a long time to do something, to update a file. The man who understood broken things continued. The freighter was gone, but Zara kept her fingertip against the glass for a moment longer, as though she could still feel the vibration of its passing through the cold pane. Then she lowered her hand and turned back to look at Marcus Hale with those eyes that saw too much. "If you're not other families," she said carefully, "what are you?" Marcus considered that the way he considered most things unhurriedly, turning it over, checking its weight. "A man who's been broken a few times," he said, "and learned a few things about it." "Like what?" "Like the breaking isn't the worst part." He glanced down at his left leg, not with bitterness, just acknowledgement, the way you'd look at an old map. "The worst part is deciding whether to try to walk again." Zara's antennae were at half-mast now, not up, not down, hovering in that careful in-between space she'd learned to keep them when something was interesting and she didn't yet know whether interesting was safe. She turned back to the window. Another ship was crossing the far edge of the viewport, a smaller one, a courier class, its running lights blinking amber and white in the dark. "Pell thinks you came here for me specifically," she said. "Pell is right. She told you about my file." "Oh, she did." "Then you know everything bad about me already." "I know everything that got written down," he said. "That's not the same thing." She glanced at him sideways, a quick, precise look. "What's the difference?" "Files tell you what happened to a person," he said. "They don't tell you who the person is. Those are two different documents." He shifted his weight slightly, redistributing it away from the left leg without making a performance of it. "I read what happened to you. I don't know you yet." Yet the word sat in the air between them. Zara heard it. Her antenna registered it, a faint elevation, involuntary, immediately suppressed. "Most people read the file and think they know enough," she said. "Most people are reading to confirm what they've already decided." He said it without judgment, just as observation, the way a navigator states a heading. "I was reading to learn." She was quiet for a moment. The courier ship blinked and drifted and disappeared behind the station's strut. "And what did you learn?" she asked. "That you're 9 years old and you've already figured out that hope is dangerous," he said, "and that you've been disciplined enough to act on it." He paused. "That's not weakness. I want to be clear about that. That took something real." She turned to look at him fully now, both antennae moving slightly. The coordinator in the doorway held her breath again. "Everyone says they want me to hope," Zara said. "They say it like it's easy, like I forgot and just need to be reminded." "It's not easy," Marcus said. "It's probably the hardest thing there is once you've had good reason to stop." He met her eyes steadily, those luminescent eyes that were the color of dying stars and that were currently doing something much more alive than dying. "I'm not asking you to start hopping today. I'm not asking you to start at all on any particular schedule. I'm asking you to sit with the question for a while, that's all." "Sit with it how?" "Same way you sit with anything uncertain." He gestured slightly toward the empty space in front of the window, the place where the ships had been and weren't anymore. "You watch, you wait, you don't decide yet." Zara looked out at the dark where the courier ship had been. Something about the darkness after a ship passed had always felt significant to her, in a way she'd never been able to put into standard. In Calorian, what she remembered of Calorian, which was less and less, the words going out like fires without fuel, there was a phrase for it. The lit dark. The darkness that proved there had been light because you could still feel the shape of where the light had been. She didn't try to say this to Marcus, she hadn't said it to anyone. But something in the way he stood beside her, not filling the space with words, made her think he might have understood it if she had. The coordinator, a different one today, not Pell, a younger woman named Seth who was careful and good and slightly afraid of everything, eventually approached and suggested that perhaps they might like to sit down somewhere more comfortable. Marcus said that was fine. Zara said nothing but followed, which Seth recognized as significant because Zara usually found reasons to drift back to her corner when Tour moved along. They sat at the small table near the window of the secondary visiting room, which had better chairs than the main one and a plant that was either thriving or dying. It was genuinely hard to tell. Seth brought 2 mugs of something warm and tactfully found reasons to be on the other side of the glass partition. Marcus wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at Zara across the table. She was small in the chair, not young small, but the particular smallness of a person who had learned to take up less space. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "What do you want?" He held up a hand slightly. "Not here, not from today, from me specifically, in general. If things were different, what do you actually want?" Zara looked at her mug. The question felt large in a way that made her want to step back from it, Most people asked her what she liked or what she was good at or what she found difficult practical questions with practical answers. Nobody asked her what she wanted. The wanting was the thing she'd locked away most carefully. I want to remember my mother's voice, she said before she decided to say it. The words came out quiet and level, stripped of everything except their plain truth. She looked up at him. I can't anymore, not exactly. I can remember the shape of it, the way it felt, but I can't hear it. Marcus was still for a moment, then he said, how old were you when you lost her? Well, 7. 2 years ago. Oh, yes. He nodded slowly. That's not gone, he said. It's changed form. The neuroscience of it, I'm no expert, but I know from my own experience that what you think you've lost, you've sometimes only lost the direct access to. It's still in there. It's just not, he paused, searching. It's not filing itself where you expect it to be. She looked at him carefully. How do you know? Because I can't directly recall what my mother's hands looked like anymore, he said. She died when I was 11, for a long time that killed me that I couldn't see them. Then one day I was repairing a fuel coupling on my ship in the dark, running my hands along the connector the way she used to run her hands along the edge of her kitchen counter when she was thinking. And I knew them again, just not from the direction I was looking. Zara was very still. They come back sideways, he said, the things we think we've lost, usually when we're doing something else. She looked down at her hands on the table. Small hands, the violet of them deeper than the rest of her skin, which was the lightest shade at her fingertips and grew richer toward her core. She had her mother's hands. She'd been told that once by one of the aid workers from the transport, a woman who had known her colony. She had held onto that information like a stone in her pocket, taking it out sometimes and turning it over. I draw the moons, she said. I've drawn them so many times that I'm not sure they're real anymore. I think I might be drawing what I invented. Maybe both, Marcus said. Maybe the real ones and the invented ones are in conversation with each other by now. She thought about that. Pell said that's okay, that it doesn't matter if it's accurate. Pell seems like someone worth listening to. She is, a pause. She's the only one who stopped making promises to me. Marcus looked at her. Did that help? Yes, Zara said it simply. The promises made it worse. Every time someone promised it would be okay, I had to watch them not be able to keep it. And then I was managing the way they felt about not keeping it. I was comforting them. She said this without bitterness, just a statement of fact. I was 9 years old and I was comforting adults about not being able to fix me. Something shifted in Marcus's face. Not dramatically, he was not a dramatic man, but something moved behind his eyes, a tightening that was not anger but was adjacent to it. That wasn't your job, he said. I know, she said, but I was good at it. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, finally. I know how that works, being so good at making it easier for everyone else that it stops occurring to anyone to make it easier for you. Zara looked at him. Her antennae were fully vertical now and she had stopped trying to manage them. It felt like a small abandonment of a long-held post and it frightened her and she let it frighten her and she stayed where she was anyway. Are you going to make promises? She asked, not combatively. She needed to know the shape of what was coming. No, he said, I can tell you what I intend. I can tell you what I believe is true, but I've been alive long enough to know that promising outcomes is a fool's game. He wrapped his hands more closely around his mug. What I can promise, the only kind of promise that doesn't rot, is about what I'll do, not what will happen. What will you do? Show up, he said, consistently, that's it. It's less impressive than the things people usually promise, but it's the one I can actually keep. Zara turned that over. It was less impressive. It was also the thing she'd never actually had. What if I'm terrible, she said. What if I can't, she stopped, felt for the words. I don't know how to be someone's child anymore. I don't know if I remember, I might do it wrong. I've never been someone's parent before, Marcus said. I'll probably do it wrong too. He said it without anxiety, just as logistical fact. I figure we'll be patient with each other about it. What if I can't be patient? Then I'll be patient enough for both of us until you can. She stared at him. You can't know that. No, he agreed, but I believe it. The plant on the windowsill, Zara noticed, was definitely thriving. She'd been wrong. What she'd thought were dying leaves were new ones, still curled, still working out how to be fully open. They talked for a long time, longer than any prospective family had ever stayed. Marcus told her about the Calorian system transits, not in the careful this is for your benefit way that adults usually talked about her origin, but in the way someone talks about a place they actually remembered, with the texture of real experience. The strange copper tint of the system's primary star, the way the second moon sat at a slight tilt that made it look perpetually curious, the particular quality of the silence on the observation deck when the station was sleeping and the moons were out. Zara told him things she hadn't told anyone. She told him about the colony's Festival of Lights, which happened when all three moons were in alignment, which she'd only seen once. She'd been very small, when every family hung lanterns in the shape of the ancestor moons from their windows, and the whole colony glowed from the inside out, violet and warm gold. She told him about the sound her mother made when she braided Zara's antenna into the ceremonial form, a low harmonic hum that Zara had fallen asleep to more times than she could count. And then she stopped. Because she'd heard it, very faint, very far back in some interior distance, like a signal from a ship at the edge of range, the actual sound, not the shape of it, the sound. She went very still. Marcus noticed, he noticed things she was learning without making a production of noticing, and said nothing, just let the silence be what it needed to be. She sat in it, the sound was already fading, receding back to wherever it had come from, but it had been there. Real for a second, the braided harmonics, warm and low, the sound that meant safe here, home. I heard it, she said very quietly. He didn't ask what. He seemed to understand that some things needed to be spoken but not questioned. Good, he said. When Seth finally came back, gently, apologetically, with the information that they were approaching the end of visiting hours, Zara stood up from the table and stood for a moment in the way she stood when she was processing something too large and too complicated to show on her face. Marcus stood too slowly with the small care of the left leg. I have to go back to my sector tonight, he said. File the formal application, there's paperwork. He said the last word with the tone of a man who had navigated genuine emergencies and found bureaucracy the more exhausting enemy. Zara nodded. I know how long it takes, she said. Pell explained the process once. He looked at her. Does knowing the process make the waiting easier or harder? She thought about it. Both, she said. It makes it less mysterious, but it makes the length of it very visible. I'll be back next week, he said, with the preliminary paperwork done, and I'll bring. He paused. Is there anything you want from the outside, books, materials, anything for your drawing? She opened her mouth to say no, it's fine, which was what she always said, the habitual diminishment of her own needs so as not to be a problem. She closed it again. Swallowed. There's a pigment, she said, a specific shade. It's called Calorian Violet. I don't know if they still manufacture it. It's for fine artwork. She stopped. This felt like too much, too specific, too much like a want she'd actually announced out loud. I'll find it, Marcus said. You might not be able to, she said, backpedaling, managing expectations, his and hers. Then I'll find the closest thing, he said, and I'll tell you what I found and why, and you can decide if it works. She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't add, is that okay, or if you want. He simply stated the plan, the way someone states a plan when they've already decided to follow through. Her antennae were all the way up. She let them be. Okay, she said. He picked up his battered canvas bag and his walking cane. At the door of the visiting room he paused, the way people pause when they want to say something and are deciding whether to say it. Zara, he said. She waited. The noise you mentioned when you're frightened. He looked at her steadily. I'm glad you warned me. I want you to know that if it happens, it won't change anything. She held his gaze. You don't know that yet either. No, he agreed, but I believe that too. And then he walked out, his footsteps slow and deliberate and slightly uneven down the corridor. And Zara stood in the doorway of the visiting room and watched him go until the doors slid shut behind him. She stood there for a moment in the after silence. Then she went back to her corner. She picked up her stylus. She looked at her drawing of the moons, the many times redrawn moons, real and invented, and somewhere the conversation between the two. She picked up the stylus, and on the surface of the smaller moon, the one who watched over the lost, she drew a very small light. Not a grand illumination, just enough to see by. The suggestion of a lamp in a window, the knowledge that someone inside was awake. Then she put the stylus down and looked at it for a long time. Behind her, the station hummed. The light panels cycled toward their evening amber. Somewhere in the corridor, Seth was making notes in her careful way, and Pell, who had arrived for the evening shift, was reading the day's visitor log with a quietly deliberate lack of expression on her face as she opened a file she'd been waiting a long time to update. Zara looked at the small moon and its small, surviving light. She did not call it hope yet. She was not ready to call it hope yet. But she did not draw it out. She left it there. The space between stars continued. The corridor outside the shelter's glass doors was louder than Zara had expected. She had passed through it before, of course, on supervised walks, on the rare medical appointments in the station's upper ring, but it had always felt like transit, like a space you moved through on the way to somewhere you had to be. Now it felt different. Now it was the first corridor of something that did not yet have a name. Marcus walked at her pace, which was slower than his natural one. She noticed him doing this and did not mention it. There were things you noticed about a person and stored carefully, and things you said aloud, and she was already learning which was which with him. This was a storing thing. A quiet record of the fact that he adjusted without announcement, without wanting credit for it. The station's main thoroughfare opened up ahead of them, the wide central concourse of Waypoint, all high ceilings and foot traffic and the perpetual low roar of a place that was always in the middle of something. Cargo haulers in their orange vests, crew on leave conspicuous by their ease, a family moving in a tight cluster, children dragging behind them, traders and mechanics and people whose business was their own. Zara held Marcus's hand and watched all of it. Her antennae were doing what they always did in crowds, swiveling slightly, independently of each other, processing the acoustic landscape the way eyes process light. She couldn't turn it off. She'd spent years being self-conscious about it, had learned to angle her head to make the movement less visible, had gotten very good at the particular tension of suppressing an involuntary reflex. She felt Marcus's thumb move across her knuckles. One small, unhurried stroke, not stop doing that, not are you okay, just I'm here, I know, keep going. She kept going. His temporary housing near the station was a two-room suite in one of Waypoint's residential annexes, utilitarian, echoey, with the slightly impersonal quality of spaces that had held many people briefly, and none of them long enough to leave a mark. He'd done some work on it in the 45 days. A second bed, not a cot, a proper one with a good mattress, because he'd asked her once whether she slept better with weight or without, and she'd said weight. And he'd found a thermal weighted blanket in a deep blue-black that was the color of the space between stars, which she had pointed to once on a chart when he'd asked her what color she'd use if she were painting the feeling of being on a ship at night. She stopped in the doorway. The blanket was folded on the bed. On the small shelf above it, there was a set of art materials, pigments, proper ones, in precise labeled jars, and beside them, in a narrow case, a shade she recognized by color before she read the label. Calorian violets. She crossed the room before she decided to and picked up the jar. It was real, not a substitute, not a closest thing. The actual pigment, slightly expensive, still manufactured in small batches by a Calorian diaspora artist collective operating out of Proxima Station. She turned it in her hands. How did you find it? She said. Research, Marcus said from the doorway. He was keeping a certain distance. She'd noticed he did this when she was processing something, held back a little, gave her the space the moment needed. There's a collective. They were easy enough to contact once I knew to look. Did you tell them? She stopped. Did you explain why you were looking for it? I told them I was a Frontier Corps veteran adopting a Calorian child and that I wanted to make sure she had what she needed. He paused. The woman I spoke with got quiet for a moment. Then she told me what brand to order and said to tell you. He paused, and something careful came into his voice. She said to tell you Coral Imvath. She said you might know what it means. Zara's antenna went very still. Coral Imvath, the kin who find you. The Calorian concept, not family by birth but family by convergence, the people the universe moved into your path, whom you recognized by some mechanism older than logic. She stood holding the jar of violet pigment and felt something open in her chest that was not quite grief and not quite joy, but occupied the specific territory between them where the most important human feelings actually live. I know what it means, she said. Her voice was steady. She had a lot of practice at steady. Marcus nodded once, the way he nodded when he understood that something significant had just happened, and that it needed to be treated with the respect of not being talked about too immediately. There's a kitchen, he said. It's small. I'm not a talented cook, but I'm a reliable one. Do you want to eat something? She turned the jar of pigment in her hands one more time, then set it very carefully back on the shelf. Yes, she said. He made noodles, the kind that came in a compressed block and required nothing but hot water and 30 seconds of patience, not inspired cooking as he acknowledged without embarrassment, but he added things to it. A packet of dried herbs he'd kept from a supply run, a spoonful of something sharp and fermented that he said his grandmother had put on everything, a scattering of small protein additions that improved the texture considerably. Zara sat at the small table and watched him work. He moved around the kitchen the way he moved everywhere economically, without wasted motion, with the slightly deliberate quality of a body that had learned to be precise, because imprecision in the environments he'd occupied could get someone killed. But it wasn't tense. It was just practiced. The difference between efficiency born of fear and efficiency born of long experience. She was learning the vocabulary of him. The way he set things down firmly but not roughly. The small sound he made, not quite a word, more of a low affirmative hum when something went as planned. The way he angled slightly toward a room's exit when he first entered it, not because he expected danger, she thought, but because some part of him had run that calculation for so many years it had become structural. She filed these things away. She had always filed things away. For most of the last 14 months, the filing had been about self-protection, cataloging the signs that preceded departure, the small tells that meant not you, not this time. Now she was filing for different reasons, and the difference felt significant in a way she didn't yet have words for. He set the bowl in front of her. She looked at it, then at him. You added things, she said. Noodles without additions are an apology for a meal, he said. He sat down across from her with his own bowl. She tried it. It was good, surprisingly good, the sharpness cutting through the starch in a way that woke up her attention. What is the fermented thing? Family recipe. I'm not entirely certain what's in it. My grandmother made it every month in a ceramic pot she'd had since before she emigrated, and she wasn't what you'd call forthcoming about methods. He ate with the calm attention of someone who has eaten a lot of meals alone and learned to be present for them anyway. She used to say recipes were private. You earned them by watching. Were you a good watcher? Better than average, he glanced at her. You're a good watcher. She looked down at her bowl. I learned because it was useful, she said, knowing what someone was about to do before they did it so I could. She stopped. Adjust, he said, not finishing her sentence so much as offering a word in case she wanted it. Yes, she ate another mouthful. I was always adjusting. He was quiet for a moment. You don't have to do as much of that now. I know, she said, but I will anyway for a while. She searched. It's like the way you enter rooms. I don't think you're scared. I think it just happens. He looked at her steadily, and something in his face was doing the thing it sometimes did, the thing she'd noticed in the very first days of the visiting period, when something she said landed somewhere real in him, when she was not just observed but recognized. Yeah, he said, that's exactly what it's like. They ate in a comfortable quiet. Outside, the station hummed around them, the vast perpetual industry of Waypoint, ships docking and departing, freight moving through the arteries of the corridors, somewhere distant a transit alarm cycling through its routine. Zara had lived inside that hum for 18 months. She had mostly experienced it as backdrop to absence, the station's indifferent noise around the silence of her corner. Now the hum was the same, but she was different inside it. She noticed this without quite knowing what to do with the noticing. After dinner, Marcus washed the bowls. Cooking is a gift. Cleanup is an obligation, he said, with the tone of a man quoting someone, and she filed that away too, and Zara took her new pigments to the small table by the window and opened the jar of Calorian violet. It was the right color. It was so precisely the right color that she sat with it open for a moment before she could use it, just looking. The moons she drew tonight were different from the ones she'd drawn 1,000 times in her shelter corner. Not in shape, her hand went to the familiar forms without thinking, the large tilted one, the small watching one, but in quality. Something in the rendering was more settled, less desperate. The moons she'd drawn before had the quality of evidence. These existed, I was there, this was real. These moons were something else, not evidence, just the moons. She worked quietly. Marcus sat in the chair across the room with a technical manual of some kind. He was always reading, she'd learned, always accumulating information about things, as though the habit of preparedness had simply redirected itself from military application to the maintenance of curiosity. And the lamplight was amber, and the quiet between them was the good kind, the kind that didn't need filling. She added the small light to the surface of the watching moon. She always added that now. Marcus, she said. Why didn't you adopt before? She didn't look up from the drawing. They did some of their best talking sideways, she'd learned, both of them at angles to each other, attending to something else. The oblique approach suited them both. You were in the Corps for 22 years. After the discharge, that was 5 years ago. 6, the sound of a page turning. 6 years, why not before? A pause, not an evasive one, he was thinking. She'd learned to distinguish his thinking pauses from his deflecting ones. He didn't often deflect, but when he did, she could feel the texture of it. First 2 years after discharge, I was useless, he said. Not dramatically, I was functional, kept myself together, but I was useless for anything that required me to be present for someone else. He paused again. I was still mostly out there in my head, the leg was still healing. I was in a lot of pain and spending a lot of energy not showing it. And after that? After that, I started to come back, got the physiotherapy sorted, took a consulting contract for a while, advising on supply chain routes, very dull, very stable, which was what I needed, started sleeping properly. Another page. Started thinking about what I actually wanted instead of just what I was supposed to do next. And you wanted this. Took me a while to admit it. She heard him shift in the chair, a small resettling. I kept thinking it was an odd want. For someone like me, I didn't have a good template for it. My own family were, he paused, complicated, and I'd spent 22 years in an environment that was very good at some things and very bad at others, and one of the things it was bad at was modeling what good looked like. Good hell. Good steady, good ordinary, good just being there. he said it simply without romanticizing it. The core was all high stakes. Everything mattered enormously or not at all. I had to learn that ordinary mattering was actually harder and more important. She looked up from the drawing. He was still looking at his manual, but with the unfocused quality of someone whose attention had migrated inward. You think you can do ordinary mattering? She asked. He looked up then. I think I'm better at it than I expected to be, he said, and I think I'm going to keep getting better. She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked back at the drawing. I'm going to keep getting better too, she said quietly, at some things slowly. There's no other way that works, he said. At the end of the night, he showed her how the lights worked, the different settings, amber for easy evenings, white for reading, and one she hadn't noticed. A very dim blue-dark setting, almost nothing, just enough to know the room was still there. For if you wake up, he said, some people find the dark. I'll be all right with the dark, she said, but she paused. Can the amber stay on in the hallway? Absolutely. She went to bed, he went to his room. The amber light held steady in the hallway between. She lay under the weighted blanket blue-black, the color of space between stars, the color she'd pointed to on a chart weeks ago, half expecting nothing to come of the conversation. And she looked at the ceiling and she listened to the station hum and she thought about the woman at the Calorian Collective who had sent the pigment and said Coral Imvath, the kin who find you. She thought about standing at the window of the shelter watching the cargo hauler cross the viewport. She thought about a man who had stopped beside her without announcing himself and watched the ship the way she was watching it and said Calorian class old model, as though it were a simple thing to give someone back a piece of their own history through plain accurate recognition. She thought about her mother's voice. And there in the dark, gently distantly, the way a signal finds you at the edge of range, she heard it. Not clearly, not for long, but real. The braided harmonics, warm and low. She lay very still and let it be there for as long as it lasted. When it faded, she didn't reach after it. She let it go the way you let a ship go when you're watching from a viewport, knowing it will come back or knowing it won't, but either way standing steady on solid ground while it crosses the dark. She closed her eyes. She slept without dreaming. Down the hall in the amber light, Marcus sat in the doorway of his room for a while in the old soldier's way, monitoring the quiet, taking its temperature, satisfying himself that the night was what it claimed to be. Then he went inside. He did not close his door all the way. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and thought, with the careful, undramatic gratitude of a person who has come a long distance to reach an ordinary room, how quiet it was. How specifically, meaningfully, irreplaceably quiet. The station hummed around them both. The stars beyond the viewport burned on without end. In the hallway, the amber light held steady, neither asking anything nor promising anything, simply doing the one thing it was there to do. Making sure whatever came, that neither of them would wake to the dark alone.